For more insight, I'd like to welcome in trial attorney and legal analyst Misty Marris. Misty, great to see you again. So I know you're following this trial closely. The defense is cross-examining the star witness today. What do you think of the approach so far? Do you think that approach changes as the cross-examination continues?
I think the defense approach is spot on, and I think they're being very, very strategic because even though Cassie's direct examination was, needless to say, disturbing, horrible, her recounting all of the abuse that she suffered, she did provide some openings, even on the direct, to the defense. And some of that was when she says, I didn't have the words to tell him how I felt. I craved one-on-one time with him. I only got that during the freak-offs. I loved him. I wanted to make him happy. These all speak to that issue of consent to this type of sexual activity and to these encounters versus coercion. And what the defense is doing, Nichole, is they're taking those openings that are on the direct examination when the prosecution, the friendly side, was getting her testimony, and they're matching it up to contemporaneous text messages. So these are text messages, and the defense started back in 2009, where we see in the messages Cassie talking to Combs about the freak-offs, saying they were integral to the relationship, and also with respect to her testimony about the control he exerted over her. But she was part of orchestrating these freak-offs. We're now seeing text messages that says, I'll go to Dwayne Reed to get candles and set up the room. So it's all about this issue, whether or not there's force, fraud, or coercion, or at the time, and Nichole, this is important, the defense is going to keep reorienting to this, especially in closings. At the time, was she a consenting partner to these sexual situations that she was in with Combs, and what was the mindset then? That's why the messages are being used, because they were contemporaneous.
Okay, so the defense is going to focus in on at the time, as you highlighted there. Let's just go back a few years. Let's talk about this multi-million-dollar settlement. Cassie had filed a lawsuit in 2023 alleging abuse and trafficking, but she and Combs settled for $20 million. How do you think that influences all of this, if at all?
Well, we know that the prosecution was aware that something the defense is going to bring up, that there's a financial motivation for her to tell this story on the stand under oath. And we call that getting ahead of the sting, meaning you bring it up because you know it's going to be an issue and you don't want it to come up on the cross-examination. You want to get it out there for the jury so it doesn't look like you're hiding the ball. That being said, Nichole, this is a very unique case when it comes to a civil settlement, and it's a huge number, don't get me wrong, but the settlement's already happened. The civil lawsuit came first. It was filed and it was settled within 24 hours. The settlement is over. The money has been paid. Usually what you see is a pause on a civil lawsuit while the criminal case unfolds. Instead, that civil lawsuit became the blueprint for these criminal charges. So that financial incentive argument is simply not as strong because that's a done deal. Now she's testifying on her own volition, and we heard prosecutors on direct get testimony that said she started therapy in 2023, and that's when she was strong enough to tell her story, and she's on the stand today because wrong is wrong. So that issue is addressed by prosecutors. You know defense is going to bring it up, but I do not think it has the impact that we generally see in these cases.
Interesting. Okay, so cross-examination happening today by the defense. But if we flip back to the prosecution, we know that the prosecution is trying to establish that Cassie's actions were not voluntary. So how does the prosecution continue to build this case?
The prosecution, what they did brilliantly was utilize that 2016 tape, the horrible tape, Intercontinental. I think we've seen it in the courtroom at least 8 times by my count at this point. And they established the narrative by Cassie through her direct examination that video was during a freak-off. She tried to leave early. Look what happens when you leave early, the prosecutors will say, and they will point to this video. And that will be the backdrop for the force, fraud, and coercion. And in addition to that, we heard about all of the violence. They saw a picture of a fat lip bruising, heard about head stomping, dragging. All of that is made more credible by the existence of that video. You can't wiggle out of it. They've already conceded there was domestic violence. So that's going to be where that force, fraud, and coercion element comes in, that he was basically in control of her. Blackmail, violence. She knew he had guns. And that's that part. But this is where the defense is kind of getting into the weeds here, Nichole, just pointing out a couple of the other messages. You know, they talk about control. She testified yesterday. He dictated what I wore. He had a lot to say about how I looked. Well, the defense, right before the lunch break, said, but isn't he a fashion icon? You know, you have a record deal. And so they're trying to undercut some of these aspects of the total control over her life, that she's doing things that at his behest, as opposed to she was a willing participant, at least with respect to the freak-offs. And just one more point, also she testified that his staff and others in his sphere were not in the room during the freak-offs. That's big. Remember, there's a racketeering charge, a conspiracy charge. So now her testimony from the defense perspective is maybe separating some of whom those co-conspirators will be to the actual freak-off. So a lot happening on this cross-examination.
All right, and you know what, the fact that you brought up co-conspirators is perfect, because my last question, you know, there's a lot of people watching this, not only because it involves these celebrities we've seen, but also because there's speculation that other celebrities and big names may be tied to this case. We know potential jurors were questioned about other celebrities. That was during the jury selection process. Do you think we'll see other people potentially named? Could we see other people potentially implicated, potentially charged? What could happen going forward here?
So the list of names that we saw was on what's called the people and places list, and that's used during voir dire to assess whether or not a juror has any connection to an individual that may come up in the trial. So a lot of those names, you know, I'm going to pick Kid Cudi. We knew that he was likely to come up, and his testimony regarding his involvement came up yesterday. He's not involved in the underlying freak-offs. He's not involved in the conspiracy, but Cassie testified that Diddy threatened to blow up his car, and then guess what? His car blew up. That's going to be part of the underlying crime of arson with respect to the RICO charge. So these individuals who are named, they might not be victims. They might not be people who are co-conspirators or involved in the direct allegations, but their names may come up in the course of testimony and evidence. We got to remember, Diddy's persona non grata among celebrities now. There's basically nobody's touching him with a 10-foot pole. But back when you know they're dating 2007 to 2018, he's a mega star. So we may see their names in text messages, testimony, other evidence, but the extent of their involvement doesn't appear that we have anybody on that list who's a co-conspirator.
Yeah, that's some really good information there, because I think that's what a lot of people are waiting to see. So Misty Marris with the answers there for us. Always appreciate your insight, Misty. Thank you.